Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here for our third and final CCNA Cybersecurity Prep session of 2025. My name is Rigo Villa. I'm one of the community managers on the Cisco Learning Network, and I'll be your host today. Before we dive in, I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about a few housekeeping items. For our Q&A and quiz questions, this will be an interactive session, and you can participate in our quiz questions and submit your questions all via Slido. If you still need to log into Slido to engage with us, please go ahead and scan that QR code on your screen, or you can also log in directly through our live streams page. Also, at the end of the event, we are going to be launching a survey in Slido with a few quick questions we really appreciate your feedback about today's session. We always look forward to your comments, and it'll be a great way to help us craft any future sessions as well. And without any further delay, I am pleased to welcome and introduce today's speaker. We have Security Solutions Engineer Dave Schwartzberg. He is going to be leading us through this presentation today, covering host-based analysis through the eyes of a malware researcher. Dave, how are you today? Ready to dive into the topic?
I'm fantastic. I am so excited. I cannot wait to talk about host-based analysis with everybody.
Awesome, awesome, Dave. Well, Dave, if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you. Please take it away.
You got it. So thank you, Rigo. So hi, everybody. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about host-based analysis through the eyes of a malware researcher, which I think that implies is to be me. Oh, a little over 10 years ago or more, I worked for some antivirus companies, and I picked up the hobby of doing independent malware research. And that's kind of where this comes from. I find it absolutely fascinating. Still to this day, it's kind of like a side hobby of mine. You can see also I am a Cisco employee. You can see there's my Twitter or X handles there. If you ever want to kind of reach out to me publicly, follow me or say, hey, what's up? Or what do you got going on? I'd love to talk to you. A little bit more about me. I've been in the industry for, I think it's almost 30 years now. I've been at Cisco for over 7 years. I have a lot of industry experience, which kind of really helps to qualify somebody who's going to be talking about something like this topic today. While I was at Sophos and Barracuda, I did some stuff as a hobby and some research, and was even told by the CTO, if any of this stuff ever gets out, we are not backing you, so you better be careful. Literally, I would give these presentations and run things like Zeus in a sandbox with a command and control so that it was in a contained environment. So there would be no career-ending moves. I'm also very active in the security community as not only a speaker, but also as an organizer. You could see there I was at ThoughtCon hacking Bananas Foster, and somebody happened to grab a picture when I said fire, and I think it's an awesome photo, so I love sharing that. Founder of an organization that's a charity called Hack for Kids back in 2014, where we teach kids cybersecurity. That parlayed into B-Sides 312 here in the Chicago area in 2023. And I'm also an organizer and a happy member of BurbSec, which is in the Chicago community, and even international in Galway, Ireland. It's a huge organization. We welcome everybody. Hacker Dad, I got 3 boys. I'm also very active in scouting, and so are they. I got 2 Eagle Scouts and 1 halfway on the way. And if you're also a fellow Scouter and you know what the Silver Beaver Award is, I received that about a year or 2 ago. And my alignment is chaotic good. Plus, there's some certifications I've earned in the past. Roll it.
All right, alert just came in. Someone's trying to brute force from the outside. I'm on it. Patching the entry point, locking the ports, routing them into a sandbox. Threat neutralized. Firewalls reinforced. Another day, another save.
Awesome. So let's dig into this CyberOps exam. These are the exam topics, version 1.2, and there's the exam number 200-201. As you can see, the exam is made up of 5 different kind of topics, categories, domains, call them what you will, and there's their percentage weight within that particular this particular exam. So for example, security monitoring is 25% of the exam. Today we're going to be focused primarily on host base, which is 20% of the exam. This lecture, just to kind of let you guys know, it is a good 3 to 4 hours if we were to do this properly and extensively to prepare you for the exam. This is going to be much more condensed. Think of this as kind of like the Cliff Notes version. There will be some additional work you need to do. This is not a single source of knowledge to prepare you for the exam. It is a primer. I want to be clear about that. All right, so what is host-based analysis? Well, I can give you a nice textbook or dictionary version, but let me kind of give you something that I kind of feel near and dear. It's kind of really anything that's related to the endpoint that could be involved with protecting the endpoint, as well as researching or investigating if there's ever a compromise or a near compromise, aka an attack. Here's more of a professional definition in kind of in the standpoint of the cyber ops. It's a process of examining activity, artifacts, and telemetry generated on an individual endpoint, such as a Windows PC, Linux, Mac, even mobile devices, even networking equipment, if you want to kind of get to that level. And you're looking for any kinds of signs of compromise, malicious behavior, or any policy violations. And this can involve any kind of system tools like running logs or processes, looking at user activity, things like a brute force attack, and any other additional artifacts that you need to uncover to detect that malicious behavior. And when I say anything else, because it changes so much, it could be anything else. So today we're really just going to be focusing on the host itself. So within host-based analysis section of the CyberOps exam, there's 7 different sub-modules. And I don't know if that's what they're officially called, but that's what I'm going to go with. And I also gave them some kind of creative names. So detection tools, not too creative, but it kind of tells you exactly what that module is trying to do. It's anything that could be on the endpoint that is related to security monitoring, using rules, whether they're rules that are defined in malware or if you're familiar with like HIPs or HIDs, and then any kind of signatures and predictive AI nowadays to kind of make it contemporary. And then there's these 3 subcomponents. Specifically, we're going to dig into those things like host-based intrusion, anti-malware, antivirus, host-based firewall. Another module is about the operating systems, the anatomy and operating systems, and all those different components to kind of bring it together, and what tools or where you'd need to look and what tools you could use while doing an investigation and analyzing anything that may have happened to that host, plus the whodunit. We're going to play a quick game of Clue, sort of, and use that as a way to figure out attribution in your investigation, and the components that make up the attribution during your investigation would be things like assets, threat actors, indicators of compromise, not to be confused with indicators of attack, as well as chain of custody. Once you've figured out who it is, Colonel Mustard, you got to prove it. It's one thing to say something's happening, it's another to provide the evidence, right? So that's what that section or that module is going to be really covering, is how to collect that evidence, what's the best type of evidence, what's corroborative evidence, and what is indirect evidence. Also, intruder alert, we've been compromised. How do we compare something that's untampered with something that could be tampered? And it's not just a disk image. This here, this is the exact definition you would find from the CyberOps page on Cisco's website, but it really kind of goes beyond disk images. It could even be a config file, a services file, or even a Windows process that may have been tampered with too. And we'll talk about that. That stuff's actually kind of fun. And then truffle hog. If you don't know what a truffle hog is, there's these cute little beasts that like to dig in the dirt to go find truffles, which taste really good with a variety of different things except ice cream. Go figure. And then as a truffle hog, you're going to be looking for anything that's happening within the system, applications, using command line tools, and just digging through those logs to find the signal amongst the noise with a truffle. And then here to me is the real fun stuff. We're going to be then going and interpreting the output from a malware analysis tool. I have a threat grid that I'm going to share with you now called Cisco Secure Malware Analytics. So I'm going to show you that, and it's a sandbox or detonation chamber. Those terms are really kind of synonymous, and I've got some really cool stuff to show you there. And then here's where I like, for me personally, I love working with hashes, encryption, and coding, and things like that. So we're going to talk about some. I'm going to show you also a quick demo on some hashing and how to use that during an investigation. Some URL screenshots where people are trying to attack my web servers that are on the internet, and then also other information about systems, events, and networking. All right, so let's dig into detection tools. Now, any one of these pieces by itself is the beginning of a comprehensive security or cybersecurity solution. You know, consumers may just put antivirus on their machine and say, I'm secure. It's really more than that. Enterprises, it's completely different. You really need what I call the belt and suspender approach to security or cybersecurity. both, because physical security kind of falls into there too, or infosec. Because some things may fail, some things may get turned off, and some things just may not, detect at all. So you need something else looking. On the bottom left, you got some definitions there. Those are some fun acronyms you're going to hear me say and come across. And then on the other sections here between the HIPS and the HIDS, HIPS is host intrusion prevention system, and then HIDS is host intrusion detection system. And I'm going to go into that in a bit deeper in the next slide. We're also going to talk about host-based firewalls. So hopefully you're already familiar with firewalls and you already know what host-based means. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more. And then everybody's favorite tools, some anti-malware and antivirus. All right, HIPS and HIDS. There's the acronym expanded out. So, host-based intrusion prevention or detection system. Now, culturally, within certain organizations, they may say, well, we are looking for any kinds of attack on our network, but if we happen to have a false positive and it stops our users from being productive, that can cost us a lot of money, or that may cost us lives. So we'd rather know about the attack and then have to remediate it later and literally let it go through. So think of like, a guard in front of a castle saying, okay, everyone through, you look a little suspicious, but go right on ahead. That's literally what HIDS is doing, where host intrusion prevention is, let me see your credentials, you can go through. Wait, you look a little sketchy, halt, I'm going to then vet you further. Nope, you're not going through, you're bad. So to me, I kind of oversimplified it, but using these snort rules, when you're applying them properly, you have a much more effective and comprehensive security solution. Again, you want many, many tools to do that. You can see on the left frame here, these tools are using behavioral analysis. So it's just looking for any type of system behavior, like something opening the registry. Okay, reading the registry, is that bad? Maybe, but generally no. Okay, modifying the registry could be bad if you're not an installer and it's not expected. So that could be a problem. Somebody might be trying to establish persistence or something. And then really kind of comparing that to other tools that may do something similar. So if you are installing software and you are an admin and you have HIPS running, generally HIPS is going to say, well, yeah, this is like a Windows installer. It's going to modify the registry. Why would I get in the way of that? And then why would an attacker also present itself as a Windows installer in order to be bypassed? But they're also doing other things. So think of like kind of the detection is a bit more, it's somewhat proactive, but I think in my opinion, it's a bit more reactive because it's happened. And then you've got to go and react and clean it up. Where HIPS is saying you cannot do like modify the registry or spawn a process or kill a process. So those rules are kind of really like what these behaviors are. They're not so much signature based, even though you can call them a signature, but they're really not a signature in the truest form of the definition of a signature. It's just a bunch of rules based on things that may happen. And then you apply them together and it kind of looks at them and says, well, every one of these things are triggering. Yep, enough of these rules are triggering as an attack. It's an attack. And you just want to protect against these different kinds of attacks. Like a common one is a buffer overflow. If you're not familiar with that, you might want to research that a bit more. But you're basically sending a bunch of characters to a service that's listening to try to cause it to crash. And when it crashes, you'll then be able to expose a position in RAM, and then you can drop your payload in there and take over the system. Also, there's other things like inter-process memory access, where it's trying to get data but getting in the way of the applications. An actual very well-known inter-process memory access tool is anti-malware software, antivirus software, because it's getting itself in the middle of the transaction or whatever that program's trying to do to analyze it. And then keyloggers, think of them really kind of physical or software-based. Physical, you need present access. You need to be at that asset in order to be able to install that keylogger. And then if it's jutting out and people look at this and go, what is this doing here? Obviously your attack has failed. But if you can get physical access to a system and it's like a PC on the floor and it's under a desk and it's dark and you have a dark or like a black USB that you're sticking in there to capture these keystrokes, and sending it off to the internet, you're probably going to be more successful in your attack. Software-based, all you really need is some other kind of tool that's like, hey, why is this application here tracking keystrokes when it's not actually being used and it's running in the background? So something like that can be caught pretty easily. But those are the different types of keyloggers that are out there. Some other fun detection tools like anti-malware, antivirus. So if you weren't aware, malware, the word comes from malicious software. People in IT and security love to come up with new ways of saying things. And antivirus, that's fairly straightforward. So I'm just going to move on from there. But the anti-malware software, the way it works, and some people go, well, aren't those terms synonymous? Not really, because a virus is a virus, and there's different kinds of viri or viruses, or however you want to say it. But malware is the overarching term for all of those other types of attacks. So that includes viruses and ransomware and spyware and such on and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways that the anti-malware software works. Some are just using hashes, and they're comparing a file. They take a hash of the file, and then they compare it to their database of known good and known bad. And if it's matched as a known good, let it run. If it's matched as a known bad, stop it. And when you stop it, you want to do something, right? You want to do, it's called a disposition. So you're going to do something, either quarantine, delete it, clean it, or alert. Well, I've got some real horror stories when customers configured their antivirus products for deleting. You really don't want to do that unless you've got an absolutely perfect use case for it. You always want to try to clean first, quarantine if cleaning fails, and always alert no matter what. Quick story, when I worked at one antivirus company, they accidentally pushed an update, and the update said that the antivirus software itself was malware. So some customers had it set delete. Well, they couldn't get the update to turn that off. So that became a really fun week for some customers and some employees there. But mistakes happen, right? And you learn from the mistake, and that's the real important thing. But that's why delete is bad. Don't delete. Quarantine. And then other things to be aware of is the methodologies that are used. I mentioned signatures. Signatures is really just kind of grabbing different pieces of some of that behavior, and then it's what's known, and it's kind of saying, okay, if we see this, we know it's bad. And HIPS and HIDS does use a lot of signatures, like based on known behavior. But where something might be unknown would be like heuristics, where there's a bunch of rules that are not specifically saying, if you see the registry being modified with this key and this data, or this data value, you could just say, hey, if the registry is being modified and in conjunction with, it's spawning a process and in conjunction with, then you're using these different kinds of broader rules to determine if something's a threat. Real time, I actually think it's kind of fun. This is when you're literally taking the file and running it through the antivirus engine, the scanner. So that's why different engines have different methodologies. Some are scanning on boot, some scan on load, and then they kind of use different methods after that to improve system performance, because that's always one of the biggest issues. I'm going to move on from here. I know we've got a limited amount of time, and again, this is a primer. Host-based firewalls, right? You're kind of looking really more for that ingress and egress on the system itself. Linux comes with a built-in firewall. Windows has a built-in firewall. Mac has a firewall. Some tools actually need to have firewalls installed, so you don't have to take what's built in on Windows. You can then use some other preferred firewall that has central management and all that other good stuff. So, and again, this is on the endpoint, on the host, so it's looking for whatever traffic is allowed. So traffic that would be like your email client, right? You want the application to load, that's allowed. That could be a firewall rule. And then more in the application part of it. But then if that email client is going to reach out to the internet, and it is, that would be another rule. Hey, allow this application to go to the internet, to any IP, but on these specific port numbers. You can also enforce any kind of blocking. So anything from going into the endpoint. Great for consumer and personal machines. A lot more encumbering if you are in an enterprise, because if you need to do a management on that endpoint, you got to make sure your firewall host-based rules are tight. Like you could do whatever you need to do without having to go and change the rules. You figure it out before you deploy. Cover that. Oh, ports and protocols. I mentioned that. And then the IP addresses communicate with this. This is something that could be on the exam, but I'll tell you this. Doing IP-based firewall management kind of takes me back to like the 90s, the 1990s. You could do that, and people do that a lot now in the enterprise on the edge, but maybe not so much on the host, right? Because you're going to have DNS. If you need to do it, that's fine. There may be a good reason, but usually it's overwhelming. It can be very overwhelming to try to keep up with that. How it works, it's basically a filter driver that's kind of sitting in the middle between your application and your network drivers, and anything that the applications are trying to do as far as like reaching out to the internet, and assumably also inbound connections, but mostly outbound. It's going to then say, okay, well, we have a rule here, and we know email client wants to go out. We've got a file management tool that wants to reach out to some network storage. We've got to allow that. But if some other random app is running, we'll just say, like, I almost said an app from the 90s, but let's just say Discord. Well, Discord's using web traffic, but you might be able to say, well, what Discord's not allowed, and if somebody runs Discord, we're just going to block the connections. Nobody's going to be able to reach it, and they'll just be frustrated and stop using it. So that would be like an example of an application rule. You can also go down to the user with some of them. Again, a bit more encumbering, but if that's how you want to do it, you can. And then lastly, if you've ever configured like a Windows IP address and the firewall rule comes up and says, hey, would you like to make this available for public too or private only? That's kind of putting you into a domain that, private would mean you would have a looser firewall rules, where public would basically be saying nothing is allowed in. Why does it matter? Well, this is perfect for remote workers. Once that endpoint leaves the network, they're not behind an edge firewall, right? So they need something there to protect that endpoint. Goes back to my expression that I've been using for decades. It's a belt and suspender approach to data protection and cybersecurity. So it's just another layer. It also helps prevent any kind of lateral movement. If somebody somehow gets a dropper on there and launches a process, and you're saying, nope, we're only allowing these lists of applications, it kind of shuts them down before they can do anything. Control against things like PUAs or potentially unwanted applications. You may want to install some kind of tool, but you know how they sometimes bundle in all of these other applications in the installer? Well, those become PUAs because they can potentially become unwanted, like browser extensions or a new antivirus program. I literally went to one of my kids' computers and he had 4 different antivirus programs installed because of that. I'm like, no wonder why you're complaining to me about your computer slow. And then the living off the land, LOTL. Living off the land means when somebody gets onto your endpoint, they're going to try to use existing tools and kind of maybe hack together some kind of better attack or some other way to kind of pivot through the environment. So ways to protect against that is minimize what tools are on there, especially anything related to networking or accessing the operating system, or using a tool that kind of just whitelists, says, hey, these are the apps that we're allowing, and those types of apps that, the living off the land, those are not allowed. And lastly, and very importantly, is data leakage. You hear about it all the time in the news. You want to make sure that your data is safe. And we've been on here, we've been talking for a while, or I've been talking for a while. I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but this beginning section is pretty heavy. The other ones just become more fun. So here's a quick comparison between host-based and network-based. If you want to grab a screenshot, go right ahead, but I know they're going to publish this and put it out on the web, and then you can kind of see this slide again. But here's just some good things to know about the differences between the two. Tools of the trade. So pretty much the format that you've seen, some terminology, why it's important, and then tools of the trade is kind of how I'm going to go through the other modules, a little bit more condensed. But anything that could be free or common off the shelf, which is COTS or enterprise-based tools, there's some lists here. Going left to right, you can see some hips and HIDs, different types of tools that are available out there. And any one of the, and I somehow overlooked Cisco on there, but Cisco has Snort, which is more kind of like in the firewall, but on the host, these are some of the ones that you would think about. Anti-malware, endpoint protection. You can see there's some Cisco tools. ClamAV is open source, but it's also a Cisco tool. And then you could see some other companies there that also provide some pretty good and quality antivirus, anti-malware type, or even endpoint protection type security. And then the host-based firewalls, you can see the list there. And I mentioned some of this earlier. There's the built-in Windows firewall. Linux uses IP tables or net filter tables. Cisco Secure Workload to protect any kind of app in a data center that would be a workload, and you just want to kind of see what traffic's going between the different apps, Sophos and others. All right, we are done with detection tools, and we're on to operating system anatomy. So things to be mindful about the OS, and this is just some kind of high-level information that I put together. So an OS is made up of a lot of different things, but primarily there's processes, services, drivers, and logs in the context of host-based analysis. So with Windows, the way it's usually configured is through a registry. It's producing event logs in the event viewer, and it's using WMI for Windows management. Linux is using systemd as a way to kind of also manage and control processes or services. It's pronounced daemons, not daemons. These are also other services and processes that could be running in the background. You would find your logs in var log, and then there's tons of files and directories. You can have a grand old time being a truffle hog, looking for any kind of signal amongst that noise. And then also your system permissions. So some people say, well, what's the difference between a process and a service? Well, a process is something that you are going to put into memory. You're kind of executing it on your own. You're launching it. But it could also be a service that runs on system start or system shutdown. That's the kind of the big difference, the way I look at it. All services are processes, but not all processes are services. I think that I just kind of came up with that. I actually stole that from what I call bourbon and whiskey. Not all whiskey is bourbon, but all bourbon is whiskey. Sorry. But drivers are middleware software between hardware and the operating system. And a great example would be a video driver, right? Doing these kind of productions, we are always dealing with video drivers, a graphics card driver, a mouse, a keyboard, so on and so forth. And logs, you kind of know what logs are. All right. Windows components specifically and how it pertains to an investigation and looking for artifacts. So within the core of Windows, you have the kernels and drivers. So the kernel is that bit of code that really makes up the operating system. The drivers I explained, but then you're going to have a whole bunch of other tools surrounding it. And having all those tools surrounding the kernel makes it an operating system, because out of the box, you get all the different tools provided by Microsoft. You also get some services you can manage. There's the registry we talked about before, the event viewer creating different kinds of logs from application systems, user security, stuff like that, audit logs. And then the Windows management instrumentation, where it's managing a Windows system, whether you're going to do that locally or remotely, whether it wants to be through a script, some other application, or a management tool. Artifacts would be things you can find in the system monitor, in the event viewer, checking out your registry hives. Hey, when was the last time it was modified? PowerShell logs. So many malware attacks these days have some kind of PowerShell being launched. So if you're not logging PowerShell, you're really missing a big part of your practice. And it continues on. It doesn't stop. How these things could be abused is through rogue services. Servicehost.exe, that's a great one that a lot of malware goes after. Sometimes they try to kill it, even though there's several threads launched, but then they attach themselves to it, and then the operating system relaunches it, but now it's modified. And that's kind of one way that they get in. Harder to do nowadays, but that was something that we used to do not too long ago. Messing with drivers, messing with WMI, and all these other ways that you can kind of abuse a system. Linux, it has a kernel too. What's different is a Linux is a distribution, and it's a distribution because you're going to get the core code to run that kernel on some hardware, but then you kind of get to pick the windowing system, other tools you want to install. You don't have to have a windowing system at all. You can kind of go just command line. It's kind of how I use Linux generally, unless it's on a laptop. But and then once you've got everything set up, you can control it through systemctl or system control or systemd. Systemd is the service that's running in the background, kind of helping you manage your processes and kind of keep them a bit more secure. You can go to varlog and have a good time with D messages, syslog, auth logs, access logs. Package management, I think, is also very important when it comes to an operating system, because the different flavors or distributions of Linux do it a little differently. And then you might also want to be looking into, if you're not already deploying things like SE Linux and AppArmor to kind of secure and harden that operating system or distributions a bit more. You could find artifacts and things like system control configs. So when you go to the services file, if somebody got on the box, they may add a line in there when that system starts to do like an SSH back to their listener. And now they're basically creating a reverse tunnel for them back onto that box and establishing some kind of persistence. That may sound fun. It's fun for them, nightmare for us. So looking at your sysconfig logs, running hashes against them before an attack and then after an attack. And if they don't match, you know something's up and you got to do an investigation. And that'll actually probably save you some time. A little bit of effort and up front, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Always check logs. Learn how to use tail, head, sed, awk. You need to know those commands in order to be a real wizard with log and hunting through logs like a truffle hog. And then any other history, and any one of these things can be abused. You can see there on the right column, the far right column. Tools of the trade. See, this one was a bit faster. So cross operating system or OS monitoring, areas of focus that you want, any processes that are being created. Are these processes that you're expecting, or somebody else do it? Services changes. Is a service being stopped? Why is the antivirus service being killed? These are things to be mindful of and to log. Any drivers or modules that are being loaded or removed. Any authentication activity, like a brute force attack. Somebody is knocking at your door, trying over and over again to get in. That is some activity that should be logged. Some people, I've literally had some people tell me, well, why do I need to log authentication success? So, well, because there's so much of it, right? It becomes overwhelming. I go, well, because when someone's brute forcing, when they stop, you want to look at the next log and see if they actually were successful. You just don't want to assume they were not. And then any kind of script execution, and then file integrity, making sure your files are not modified. There are some Cisco tools you can take a look at and try out. Cisco XDR is great for kind of bringing a lot of this stuff together. It's not a SIM or a SOAR, a little SOAR-like, but it's more like reaching out through APIs, getting information. You could say, hey, I saw a SHA hash on this file that was in an email. Who else ran that file? And it's going to go out in your environment, bring it back, and present it in a nice, pretty picture. And I'll show that to you in about 5 or 6 slides. Orbital's very cool. It uses OS query as a way to gather information about an endpoint. Information like, has the host's file been modified? Or is anything happening with SSH, right? The known hosts, that somebody put their key in there, and that's problematic. And the way to kind of get all these logs and kind of put it together in a tool called Splunk. Non-Cisco tools you can see on the right, a lot of them, a lot of overlap. Just be mindful of some of these terms like EDR. EDR and XDR are not the same, even though an EDR can work with an XDR. An XDR does not need an EDR. Somebody's going to be like passing out because I said that. But an XDR can do well without an EDR, but it does even better with an NDR, network detection response. And you can see there's some other cool, fun tools, Tripwire and Waza and stuff. All right, we're done with Module 2, on to Module 3, and we're almost halfway through our time, so I got to step it up here. All right, so the attribution of an investigation, you need to understand these terms too, right? So you're going to be looking at terms like, an asset. And from the CyberOps exam standpoint, an asset is anything, if compromised, could impact confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You're going to start to see that more in this session. If you saw Pierre's session on the CIA triad and you don't know anything about CIA, once you're finished with today, go right there to that session and watch that one, because some of this other stuff we're going to talk about in the next half hour is going to make more sense. But CIA is a big part of security. So an asset can be, and also remember, if compromised, right? In the context of the CyberOps exam. So an asset could, an asset could be something that's physical, like your computer, network equipment, servers, Wi-Fi equipment. A digital asset, which could be your data, right? Your personal data, corporate data, intellectual property, credentials, source code, any of your system configurations. I talked about on Linux with your host, your services config files, right? Those could also be an asset. People, employees with some kind of knowledge or privilege. I talked about the security guard, right? That, like at the castle, that is an asset. You're using their knowledge and their ability to recognize a threat or a non-threat and hoping that they're going to be accurate. So people, right? You got to educate and train. You notice I use both terms, not either or. Training is important. Education is also important. So get them prepared for an attack. And when it happens, you're going to be able to minimize the number of breaches that you have. And then processes is not so much stuff that's like code running in memory. It's more about your business operations and your kind of your workflow to get things done. A threat actor. So really kind of any, they're the folks that can carry out the threats, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Examples of intentional: cyber criminals, right? They're usually financially motivated. They tend to be dropping the ransomware or breaking in or do some kind of damage for money. There's the insider threat. So that's a bit more unintentional if they're just kind of poking around. I had a guy that worked for me years ago. He was just kind of really early in career. I did not make him an admin on the systems, but he was an admin on his own box, and he was launching the DNS management tools and the DHCP tools. Now, back when I was like an IT director, my logs were clean. They were all, my Windows event logs were all blue. And if you're managing systems, you know what that means. Whenever I saw yellow or red, I was on it and I fixed the problem right away. Well, I started seeing some yellows and I'm like, what's going on here? And it was that guy, my new employee, was poking around trying to figure out how to like use the tools and trying to modify things. And I'm like, what are you doing here? And I had things set up in such a way that when there were some changes, and he wasn't really trying to do damage, he was just trying to learn, and I respect that. But eventually he continued to do things, and then we had to part ways. It was just becoming too problematic. So because somebody was in my environment, I was able to know whether that was really a threat or not, or a threat actor. But somebody could also be malicious. So he could have been trying to do something maliciously, but he never had a chance because everything was locked down. You also got nation state groups. They're usually doing some kind of espionage, or they're kind of motivated in some way. In fact, some people go, man, some folks out there, they'll kill for that exploit. Nation states will kill for an exploit, especially if it's something that can get them into an environment, of systems, an enterprise, a corporation, a government, and nobody else knows about it, and there's no patches. So that stuff becomes high value to them. That becomes their assets. Hacktivists, folks with some kind of ideology that are like, hey, you know what? I'm really not liking this political person, so I'm going to go do some attacks and try to make their life miserable. Quick story on that. A few campaigns ago, when more and more politicians were using things like AWS for fundraising and stuff, some hacktivists figured out their topology, and because AWS is pay to play, right? Based on your utilization, you pay. So they were totally hammering their systems, and it caused like this gigantic bill. It was like an invoice for almost $500,000, which really cut into their campaign funding. So you can use just something like that as a way to hurt your political adversaries. Very interesting, right? And then script kiddies, they're just folks that are curious about computers. They find some tools and they're going out there using them, and they're very opportunistic. It doesn't necessarily mean they're hackers or criminals. They're just looking to, gain access or something, but they're not highly skilled. That's the important thing. Your IOCs and your IOAs. So indicators of compromise, and this is very kind of important that you understand the distinction between the two. A compromise is when something bad has already happened. You're collecting artifacts based on what has happened. An attack is in progress, and it may be paused because sometimes there's these like slow attacks, but it's something that there was no compromise. They never got in, but you see a lot of activity that looks like it may be successful, but it's definitely curious and suspicious. And there's a lot of information on that. And then chain of custody, you're going to see that a few more times. That is essentially the handling of evidence and the improper chain of custody. If when you're improperly handling that evidence, it could be challenged, especially in a court of law. Hey, we're submitting this disk drive because so and so committed, financial frauds and stuff, and here's all the evidence. But if that's tampered with, it's not admissible. So when you do your investigations, you do your data acquisition of the drive, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then you run a hash on that drive. So you could say, here's the hash. You make a copy, you do your investigation, run a hash on that. They should be different. But when you're going back, you're like, look, we never modified the source. We did our investigation here, different hashes. That's very important as well. So things that you want to keep in mind with chain of custody is who collected the evidence, when and where it was collected, how it was stored, where it was stored, who has access to it while it's stored, and then how it was preserved. All very, very important things. I made one slide specifically on this to kind of really highlight and emphasize the point. Take a quick look at this. This is the difference between the IOCs and the IOAs. One is something that's happened in the past. One is happening now. One you're reacting to, one you're hopefully being proactive to. Something that is known, something that is behavioral. And then other things is, you want to confirm and verify the extent of the breach. The other one is you're hoping to stop it before it becomes a bad CNN moment. Tools of the trade. You want to try them all. Not catch them all, try them all. Investigation focus areas, you're going to want to do stuff with endpoints, right? Those EDR tools are going to give you a tremendous wealth of information in addition to some XDR tools like Cisco XDR, the investigate section, which the next slide is actually a really pretty picture of that. And then threat intelligence. This is stuff where like Cisco Talos comes into play and other companies where they're doing things to gather information about an attack and then sharing it with you and then using it in a way to update and enrich the tools that you're using. So when you're going out and trying to figure out what happened, a lot of the times they already have. If it's a new attack and you send them the information, they will investigate it for you and then provide the update available to everybody. Just chain of custody again. All those artifacts that you're collecting, make sure that they're being stored properly and make sure that you're running hashes on them, showing that they're not being tampered. And a SIM is, again, a log aggregator and a bit more than that. I'm oversimplifying, and a way to take that data and help find the signal from the noise. Again, Cisco tools you've seen before, some non-Cisco tools you've seen before. I think I threw Elastic on there, and maybe Elk Stack may come up later, but those are also very useful tools. Lower price point. When a security tool is free or doesn't cost very much, it means you're going to spend a lot more time with it. Facts. This is Threat Grid, now known as, this is XDR. Threat Grid's later. So here in this view, this is the relations chart within XDR Investigate. And you can see at the top, it says executed malware.ioc. So what I did was I was looking for something where there was some kind of malware that was executed in my environment. There's my name in the upper right-hand corner. This literally happened in my home environment on one of my kids' computers. And it wasn't very long ago because I found it a few days ago and I thought I'd share it with you. The indicators on the right, you can see at the bottom one, when I click the executed malware IOC, those three yellowish, greenish objects that are highlighted, those were illuminated because it's telling me that endpoint, desktop, whatever, GOV5B16, saw this particular attack, this IOC, and this IOC is related to those two malicious processes that spawned. There's some other things too, like if you see the process, they're reaching out to IPs like 3.167, whatever. That's not my networking in my home. The 172 is not the networking in my home. So these endpoints literally reached out to the internet to malicious servers for whatever reason. I didn't really kind of dig into this much more because the secure endpoint that's running on the machine kept it under control. But now I can talk about it in a happy way and not in a sad way. And it also even made a request out to it was a web request, unencrypted web request to QDP dot something, quick something. Now I could click on that when I'm in XDR and kind of drill down. Not a lot of time for full-on demos, but I thought a screenshot would help really paint a nice picture and show you what's going on, like the file path and all the other things. And then I drilled down a little bit more, and I wanted to show you some stuff from MITRE ATT&CK. You may have heard the term or the acronym TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. So these are things that the criminals are doing as a way to get in. This one particular one is a JavaScript Trojan. It's a generic version of an IOC. It's based on command and control. It's got a criticality high score. That's why I wanted to show it to you. It tells there's a little bit of information in the description, and it can tell you where it's actually the technique is in the application layer protocol. Below is one that's a high, not so bad. Persistence is obnoxious. It is usually a sign of a threat, but also something to be aware of. Moving on to prove it. So now that you've played a game of Clue and figured out who done it, now you've got to prove that it was Colonel Mustard with a candlestick. All right. Important terminology in this module. So things like an acquisition. I've already said the term earlier, but it's ways of kind of gathering the information. So a bit more of a formal definition is a process of gathering data from a suspect's computer or device using specialized tools. And kind of also plays into the chain of custody, right? So if you do a proper acquisition, your chain of custody has a better chance of not being questioned. And then, so we've talked about chain of custody already. Live analysis is when you're examining kind of volatile data, usually in a computer's RAM, and it could be lost when the system's turned off. So I've heard some horror stories where somebody's compromised, and what they do is they turn off their computers. Well, you've just gotten rid of any evidence and artifacts that you could use for investigation. So now what they're doing is they're trying to figure things out. So I would say unplug the computer. You don't necessarily need to turn it off. Get your acquisitions of the disk, RAM, everything that you need to get to do your investigation, and then wipe it clean and start from a fresh image, right? Get rid of everything, because now you have a copy of what happened and you can figure it out. Don't power it off. You're going to make a huge mistake. Not the end of the world, but you just made your world a lot harder. A forensics image is literally what I've been talking about, the bit-by-bit copy of some kind of storage. And then the metadata, data about data. So anything like any file, like you can look at like Microsoft Word, and you could take a document you or someone else created. And if you look at the properties, you're going to see metadata in there. When it was created, when it was edited, who authored it, so on and so forth. If you look inside of a GIF or even a PNG, it's more specific to a GIF. You can see EXIF data. So data at the beginning of that graphics file has information about, for example, where the picture may have been taken, if the picture was edited with Photoshop. It'll have those kinds of artifacts in there that you can also use. Some attackers will use graphic images, and they will embed information that they're using as a part of their attack in EXIF data or any metadata. So it's something to also be mindful of and to look for. Here's the letter I in CIA. Evidence types, there's 3 types: best, corroborative, and indirect. The best is your primary evidence. These are your log files, original data, things that have not been modified. And you can go back and say, yep, this is original and unaltered. And we know that because we have a solid chain of custody. Anything corroborative, I don't know why I always struggle saying that word, is any kind of thing that supports the primary evidence. So for example, things like a snapshot of a file system. In 2 slides, I've got something that kind of gives you a little bit of that. So you can kind of see what the file system looked like before the attack, right? You build your gold star image, you get a snapshot of your file system, and when something happens, you're comparing the differences. And then indirect evidence is something that is created, could be a report, that is created from all the other types of evidence that you've collected to support your findings and assertions. This is all very important. It all works together, but you really need to understand the importance of integrity. It's not just there because it looks good. It's there because you want to make sure you're doing hashes. You want to make sure that you have checksums. You want to make sure things are properly time-stamped. Anybody wants to go look at any type of data for an investigation, they need to check it out. Kind of like when you're signing into a building for security reasons, who signed in, who signed out, same thing. Back to the tools of the trade, any kind of evidential acquisition. So whether it's from a host, you can see the different ways of getting at it. Windows event logs, sysmon logs, audit D, Journal CTL. I use Journal CTL a lot on my Linux boxes for log information. Again, always verify your integrity, check your timestamps, chain of custodies, there it is again. And this can also apply to network devices or mobile devices, right? So if you got a lot of mobile devices in your environment, you're going to want a solid mobile device management or MDM tools so you can get information, or even using like MFA tools. So if somebody's trying to log in, you now have logs about somebody trying to gain access or somebody failing at gaining access. The forensics imaging, I know I talked about it a lot here and using hashes and stuff. I'm going to skip that, but I'm going to go to the write blocker. So basically a write blocker is a way to, you can, after you get your RAM and you do power off the PC, and you can get like a software-based bit-by-bit copy using a tool like Incase, which you'll see soon, and that'll write everything and put it someplace, in storage. But you can also literally take the disk and put it into a hardware system like a write blocker, and if you have another similar disk, they both kind of go in there, and you can write from one to the other and do a bit-level copy. You will lose some things, but you get most of it. It's another way of doing it very quickly. And then you want to make them read-only. You don't want that disk to be modifiable whatsoever, because again, you've blown your chain of custody. So I used an ls command on Linux. Actually, yeah, this was Linux, and sometimes I use Mac. I get them confused. So what I did here, well, you can see a little gap here. I kind of blocked out my IP address, protect the innocent. But after I ran a command to output the entire directory structure and file system acquisition, I didn't get the copy of the files, just the names and the structure and the directories, into a file called system.txt. Then I ran the head command, because when I ran a tail, which gives me the bottom of the file, nothing really interesting. But I said, let's look at the top of the file. Oh, there we go. / there's root, and then all the different files, directories, and symbolic links and everything that you saw in my root. So I was like, just give me the top 100 entries, and that's what that looks like. On to Trufflehog, digging through those logs. My favorite logs are made of cheese. I don't live in Wisconsin. I'm not from Wisconsin, but I'm not far from it, and I love to visit often. Cheese logs are great, especially the port wine ones. Highly recommended if you can eat cheese or wine. Keywords here. So there's a lot of terminology when it comes to this one. I'm going to kind of go through some of it as best and quickly as I can, right? I've said the word log probably 25 times, if not more, but the CyberOps definition of a log is a timestamp record of an event generated by a system, application, device, or a security tool, right? I mentioned using an MFA tool like Duo. As users are logging in, well, that is not a specific system. It's something happening to a system. The security tool is creating the logs. An event, and yeah, I gave you some examples like services starting and stopping. All that stuff needs to be logged. An event is a single action recorded in a log, such as a process launching, a user logging in, give that example a lot of times, and any kind of configuration changes. If you're not keeping track of when your systems are having configuration changes, like material configuration changes, you're missing a big part of also how to keep your systems protected. Going back to the comprehensive cybersecurity protection solution, you need to keep track of stuff like that. An event ID is a much more like it's specific or unique identifier by that system. So when you look at Windows event logs, you'll look at like an event ID, like 101 could mean something to authentication. I'm probably wrong. Someone's going to like put a comment in there. That's not what it is. It's that. That's fine. Go ahead, do it. But 101 could be something related to authentication. And if you're doing a search or a hunt like a truffle hog, and you're like, well, I need to go find that truffle, and we know that event log 101 is related to something I'm looking for, why would I go and read all the logs? Just give me everything related to that event ID, and you can kind of save yourself a ton of time, and also start to develop your chain of custody and your artifacts. A severity level is something that's, and I put that one on here because I felt that was kind of also important, is indicating the importance or the impact of an event. So kind of going back to hips and HIDs earlier on, almost 50 minutes ago, on with Snort and the firewall, it has impact logs from 0 to 4. And you can then go, oh, look, we got a whole bunch of 1s and 2s. We need to react. 4, we'll get to that tomorrow. Let's go get some lunch. So this kind of tells you what's going on and how you should respond. So if you don't have severity levels on these things, again, it's going to make your job even harder. And then retention is another important one. I'm always talking to people about keeping firewall logs or any kind of system logs. They take up space on disk, they make systems slower. So you're always better off sending those logs to some kind of aggregator, kind of keep your system zippy. And also when it's third party, if it's somewhere else, and like in a backup, and somebody gets on the machine, generally, like if I do it, I'm going to want to hide my tracks. I'm going to start modifying logs. I'm going to delete logs. But if you have a copy somewhere else and they don't know where it's going, they can't delete it. So there, you want to manage how long you're going to keep those logs. That's where retention comes in. Forever is crazy, but anywhere from a year or 2 to 3 to 5 may be less crazy. But you definitely want to keep them for at least 2 to 3 years. Here's some other terms I'm just going to rattle off when you hear them. If one you don't know, jot it down really quick and go Google it later, because they're all relevant to terminology when it comes to log analysis, but we don't have time to hit them all. So here we go. Correlation, normalization, contextual data, artifacts, alert, false positive, false negative, noise, baseline, anomaly, indicator extraction. That's a phrase. That's 2 words. That's a phrase. Timeline analysis and parsing. All right. A lot of these things we covered when specific to host-based log analysis with the operating system. We've mentioned those tools already. You know that already. If you have any other type of endpoint management, EDR, SIM, SOAR, you want to also go there. I gave you great examples why you would do that. When you're parsing something, right, you're going to be then taking that log information and you're kind of breaking it down into more digestible chunks that are going into your SIM or your SOAR. And those chunks could be right there in front of you. Timestamp, a source, an error code, or some ID of something that happened, like an action or something happened. And then from there, you're going to create your assertions around those artifacts. Indirect evidence is not necessarily needed here, but I think that was left over from another slide. I apologize. But what's really kind of important when it comes to the log analysis is you're going to find some evidence that could also indirectly be related to that attack. So just because something looks like it may not belong or may not be relevant, don't discount it. I think that's really what the message was. Here's another screenshot of logs from my server. Again, I blocked the IP. You can see the timestamp on the far left all the way down to the second, and sometimes it even goes down to milliseconds. The process that's running is start gradvids.sh. It's a shell script. There's the process ID. I'm kind of going left to right here if you didn't pick that up. There's another timestamp. Then there's so it's an info log, right? This is an info log, and these are all from Journal CTL. I mentioned that one earlier. You can see the IP address, so you can see someone with a 4-dot address is running some kind of script or bot. They hit my web server, and I noticed this was happening. And a few weeks ago, I was kind of sitting there with a friend, and we were on our machines, and I'm like, he used to work for an anti-bot company. I'm like, dude, I keep seeing these hits on my web server, and I'm not like running any of these pieces of software they're looking for. And he goes, oh, what you got to do is the bots tend to go fast, and they like to go fast. You need to have something where your web server is redirecting them to a page that has like a really slow load time. They hate that. I'm like, that sounds awesome. So that night I crafted together something where you can see for yourself. Go to https://gradvids.com/test. You can see what it looks like. But what happens is when somebody does like this GET request and they want to go to wp-links-opml.php. So first of all, I'm not running any PHP on the server. So when they make that request, they're guessing. They're trying to figure out what's going on. No PHP, it's going to 404. But what I did is I put something in my Python script that says, hey, whenever you see a request from one of these that's not from one of these routes, I listed out the routes, and then the final result is a redirect, which is what 302 means. Send them to POW ? Next. POW stands for proof of work. So it's basically making them consume CPU cycles needlessly. It's a great troll. And also you can see they did a WP. That's WordPress. So they're trying to see if WordPress is there. I have no idea what kk.php is. I don't need to go through all these, but there's even one that's like 13.php. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but somebody's trying to find something and they failed, and I got back at them. All right, Truffle Hog, here's the tools of your trade. I'm going to kind of go through this really, really quick. We've mentioned SOARs and SIMs, but specifically a SOAR is a security orchestration and automation and response tool. It is a tool that you're going to send data to, and when, like Cisco's XDR is kind of like a SOAR, but not. And what I mean by that is you don't need to necessarily send things to it, but if the XDR tool is monitoring for a certain piece of information, like, hey, we noticed that some endpoint is infected, and it created a log that said it's infected. Well, we want to do stuff like, one, let's isolate that host. Two, let's collect a bunch of data from that host that's relevant for an investigation. Three, let's put a message in a WebEx team space saying we found this endpoint name or IP, or you have both, and all this data has been compromised. I actually have that set up, and that threat that I showed you earlier in XDR, when that threat came in, I have a room in WebEx at Cisco specifically for any threats that are found in my environment. And right away, that came right in within not even a minute. It came right in, and I knew something was up, and I can then react to that notification, which was what was created by a SOAR-like tool. SIMs are more like, get all the data, give me all your data, build templates, build all kinds of rules and triggers and fun things, and then you can go out and be automated and notified. They're very similar, but they have some differences. And then you can see some other Cisco security tools and then some non-Cisco security tools. This is a dashboard again in XDR. So more of a, when you first log into XDR, you can build these different custom dashboards with all the different tools you've plugged into it. So I have my SecOps dashboard here. You can see there's the compromised device on October 22nd that we've been talking about. You can see my threat hunting updates coming from Secure Endpoint. You can see behavioral indicators, stuff that's all being fed to me through Threat Intel, right, through Talos, and so on and so forth. So, pretty charts and graphs that help you get through the day. All right, fun stuff, and then one more after that. So, fun stuff. I love hashes. I love doing encryption and coding. Well, and that's really kind of relevant to what we're talking about today, because any one of those threats, those files can have a hash run on them. So a hash is essentially a fixed length code that's created, or fingerprint, based on some kind of cryptographic algorithm. And you see them there like MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256. Depending upon the algorithm determines the actual length of that fingerprint or that code that's produced. And what's really, this is the part I love about it, is that code is created, and even if you modify, like let's just say it's a plain text file, like you add a space, you change the name of the file, you add a period, you take away a period, it will produce a brand new unique hash that's not like a little bit of a change, like the whole thing looks practically different. And you cannot derive the source that that hash was created from by having the hash. So passwords being hashed is pretty cool, and we've done that for a long time. But then there's tools like John the Ripper that goes and creates hashes based on a password list and does its best to try to brute force its way in. So those hashes can be generated fairly quickly for a computer, but they're always going to be the same hash with the same algorithm. So password 123 with a capital P, if you're always using MD5 and I create the same password 123 with a capital P, those MD5 hashes will match. And that's when you see these brute force attacks using certain like password cracking tools, is they're trying to get a hash to match, and they're just brute forcing through it. The URLs, you probably know what a URL is already. That got you here today. We don't need to go through that. And then anything on the system, those system event networking information, just again, using signatures, which we talked about, but it's a signature-based detection. It could be using heuristics or both. It could be using behavioral analysis like HIPS. And also it's really built to stop known and unknown threats. Now, known threats, again, that's where the signatures come in, and then unknown is where the heuristics come in. And that can include any one of those other pieces of software that we've been talking about for the past almost hour, kind of getting there. This is another example from one of my log servers. You can see the IP, the attack came from a 157 address. They got a 400 message, because whatever they're sending, my system's kind of taking it, but kind of not. And it's really weird because I don't know Like when I try to decode that, that's not encrypted, even though some people look at it and go, hey, is that encrypted? No, it's really not. It's something it's sending. Now, it could be encrypted, but my system doesn't know how to receive it because it doesn't have a key. And it may look like hexadecimal, but I'm telling you now, it could be hexadecimal with some other stuff, because that /X is usually the indicator that it's hexadecimal, and it's 0 through 9 and A through F. There's a W. That's not hexadecimal. There's a capital A with a little accent on it. That's more Unicode than it is hexadecimal. So something's happening here. I thought I'd show it to you. It's another kind of attack. You can see the copyright symbols in there. Like, I don't know what this is. I also don't even want to waste my time figuring it out. I just blocked the IP. I put that up there. Base 64 is not encryption. I don't know why some people call it encryption. It's encoding. Another pet peeve of mine, thought I'd share. Tools of the trade here. We've mentioned all these different tools. You already have a lot of understanding of what they are, so I'm just going to kind of move on. But take a quick eyeball look. Oh, Posh, PowerShell. You definitely also need to log anything, or if you need to do any kind of hashing, you could use like get event log or get the hashes and stuff. You can use those tools. They're very, very good. All right. Threat grid, secure malware analytics. I was digging through like a truffle hog in threat grid, and I found this one file that I thought was pretty interesting. It's the rectangular blue box. It's a bunch of numbers .zip. And it's got the little red skull. So that tells us it's bad. And you can see the 3 different hashes that we've been talking about, right? So that's an example of the same file having 3 different hashes because they're 3 different cryptographic algorithms. But they're all bad. And then on the right, the behavioral indicators, you can see, like, for example, the artifact flagged malicious by an antivirus service. The indicator score is 95. I like to call those risk scores. It's an indicator score. You can determine if it's risky or not. But it's also running on Windows 7. I haven't seen Windows 7 in quite some time, so to me, it's not that risky, but I know it's still out there. Then you can run the report, right? So here's more of the indirect evidence, right? We've looked at best, corroborative, and now indirect is this report that's bringing all this stuff together. We know it runs on Windows 7 64. We know when this report was created and ended because we detonated the malware in a sandbox. So we were able to gather all this information. So one behavioral indicator with a severity of 100 and a confidence score of 95 says that this is malware. And then the detections, again, the blue box is telling you all these other malware threat intel research labs have determined that it's also malware and what they're calling it. So some are calling it a Trojan, some are calling it a bat, some are calling it a downloader. Whatever, it's malware. We don't want it. We want to stop it. We want to know about it in case it's in our environment. Here's an artifact. It was adding registry keys. So you could see where it was adding the keys. It was doing something there with Explorer. It had some other value names, and it just sent like a string of characters. This looks like fuzzing or trying to do some kind of buffer overflow, possibly to Explorer, but I don't know. It would probably take more than that. But yeah, this is like an example of an artifact from malware. And then at the end of the report, I also had some other information. So again, the top artifact is the file name. There's the hashes to prove it. Artifact 7 I thought was kind of interesting because this ran as an administrator, and in their documents folder, it created a text file. I did not see the text file, do not know what's in, but on the far right where it says created by 25 PowerShell, PowerShell created that file. So they were doing something with PowerShell in order to drop something on that endpoint. They probably ran some kind of command to get the system information and then put it in a file so they can upload it later. And then here's the last section, tampering and no tampering. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a disk image. It could be just a file. The important thing is if it's untampered, the file is pristine and it's proven with hashes. It's only known users can have access to those systems. You're looking at expected process tree, right? All the different processes running on that endpoint. No indicators of persistence. I gave an example before with SSH in the services config file, and you want your logs to be clean. A tampered host would have literally the opposite of all of those things. And why is this important? Well, it's forensics, but it's not forensics as much as it is basic incident response. Learning IR basics and fundamentals will make you a better forensics person and will help you pass this exam much more easily. And remediation really kind of begins on capturing that state. And that's part of where you can then compare what is known and untampered versus what could be tampered once you capture that state. You're also looking for any of those unexpected or expected state changes, right? If anything changes that is normal, because there are normal changes, you can document that and then put it to the side. But anything that's abnormal, then you want to dig deeper. And you need to quickly learn what is normal. That's very important. Some quick tools. This one's pretty fun. And in fact, if you want to have some fun in the upcoming weekend, maybe grab a quick screenshot here. And I was looking for a quote on tools that are out there, and it said good tools are half the work. And I couldn't figure out who to give attribution to that quote. So I'm just going to say I know it's not Yoda because I couldn't figure out who it was. So native Windows tools, you can see the list there. Linux, you can see the list there. And that very bottom one, the ls-alr, capital R, / redirect or greater than symbol to system.txt is how I got my system file structure. You too can play that game at home. And then there's a whole bunch of other tools on the far right that you can use. Again, get that screenshot. 3, 2, 1. Let's go into the demo, and we're almost done. All right, so now I'm going to go here. Here's my terminal, and here's my cheat sheet. So you don't have to watch me make a lot of typos and mistakes. So here I'm in this directory, just called my tampering demo directory, and I have some files. So access1.log, access2.log. Access2.log is a backup of access1. So they should be the same. This tampering demo, well, this is my cheat sheet. So let's create a file. We're going to use the echo command. The stuff in quotes is what we're putting in the file. There's the redirect. I just showed you that on the last slide. And we're going to redirect this text into this file. And if we cat the file, you can see there it is. This is an original clean file. Now, again, for the sake of showing tampering, we want to get a hash of that file. So we're going to get a SHA-SUM 256 hash of that file, and there it is. So this part here is the hash. Now, if we come along, or not if we come along, if an attacker comes along, you could be an attacker if you want to, and then they alter a file. I'm going to go back to that services file or host file or something on that endpoint that manages it. And here I'm just going to tamper with it just so you can see the difference. But this double greater than sign means append. So I'm going to append that line to the file. And if I go back to cat, you can now see their attacker added this line. So if we do another SHA-SUM, it's different. The first one began with a 9.6. Now it's a 5.2. It ended with a 6D and it ends with a 5.5. So even if I made one little tiny change, that whole hash would be different. Again, that's going to help you during investigations to determine things if they're tampered or not. So now let's pretend that the system got broken into. First thing we want to do is we want to take a hash of both access 1 and access 2 to see if any logs were tampered with. Access 2 is our backup. It was technically stored offline, off the system. So when I do this, they should have the same hash, but they do not. Now that is telling me while I'm investigating something happened to access 1. Why is it different? Because access 2 is the one that's pristine. I'm going to use another tool called diff, which tells me the difference between the two. Go, give me the difference between access 2 and access 1, and there it is. So in access 1, these logs were deleted, and these were logs from an attacker trying to gain access. All right? Well, I think we had a fantastic time. I know I did. You guys are fantastic. I'm going to end it here with some resources for you. Again, screenshot it. If not, that's okay. I think Rigo's got a copy of them he's going to share. But these are some tools that I used or some websites I used to kind of put some of this information together, some things people have said about the cybersecurity exam you're studying for or want to study for. I want to study for it, so maybe we could come together here once in a while and do a session and kind of maybe motivate one another to pass the exam. I think that would be pretty fun. You can go to Cisco U. Here's the Learning Path URL. Then there's also the CyberOps Associate. So Arthur Salmon did a lecture I did a short URL on that one because it was gigantic. You can go there. There's also in the Cisco U, the way it's broken down is not exactly kind of how like the session was structured. It's more about let's learn everything we can about Windows. Let's learn everything we can about Linux, and kind of like that, which is fine. It's another way of learning. A website I like to use for converting text into hashes or try to figure out what am I looking at. CyberChef's another great one. The Cyber Swiss Army knife. And then when you're ready, schedule the exam. There's the link. So you know what? I don't want to go, but we're done. So back to you, Rigo. Back to you, James.
Yes. Sorry about that, everybody. I was muted. Yeah, the classic issue that we have here every once in a while. Dave, I just want to thank you for this great session today, and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with our audience today. I hope that everyone found great value in today's presentation and that it is helpful with your exam studies. One thing I wanted to mention, for those resources that Dave highlighted just a moment ago, you can access those links directly through your Slido if you're logged in. You'll find those links as well as a link to catch the replay of today's session, as well as the post-event discussion, just in case you have any additional questions. And then one other thing that I wanted to touch on before we wrap up is just to let everyone know about an offer that is available to everybody. For anybody who might be thinking of taking their CCNA cybersecurity exam or maybe any other Cisco certification exam in the near future, there is a Cisco exam safeguard offer that allows candidates to retake their exam at no extra cost if they fail their first attempt. The safeguard is available for the CCNA, the CCNA cybersecurity, and also some select professional level core exams. It's just something to consider for added reassurance or just to keep as a backup plan, just in case you need it. If you'd like some more information about this offer, you can go ahead and scan that QR code that you see on your screen, and you'll be taken to the page where you can read more about it. And last but not least, I went ahead and launched a survey in Slido, and we would really appreciate it if you would just take a moment to complete it and let us know how you liked today's presentation. We always look forward to receiving your valuable feedback. And once again, I'd like to thank our presenter Dave, our producer James, and all of our attendees for joining us here live. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time on the Cisco Learning Network. Thank you, everybody, and take care.